All right, here we are again. Welcome back. And I'd like to introduce our next presenter. We have Nick Durinzi. He's a master's student studying entomology at the State University of New York College of Environmental Science and Forestry, SUNY ESF. And for the past 2 years, his research has focused on the Elm Zig-Zag Sawfly, or EZS. Nick recently authored a comprehensive literature review on Elm Zig-Zag Sawfly published in the Journal of Integrated Pest Management. Please give a warm welcome to Nick.
Hello,
Also, we have
everyone.
printed
Oh,
copies of his papers scattered around the room if you want to read the paper. Go ahead, Nick.
thank you. So, hello, everyone. Elm Zig-Zag Sawfly it's definitely not one of the worst pests out there. So I feel like maybe not a lot of people have um, heard about it. So I generally give a pretty wide overview, and that's mainly what this will be. Um, to kind of situate us, um, I just want to talk about why elms, or kind of the importance of elms in North America. Elms have never been used really commercially, but like in like wood products, like some other trees have been. But elms were really important as shade trees and street trees in North America. There was a time where the maj like the majority of street trees were basically all elms. Here's an example of one here. And basically, we don't really see elms that much anymore. And that's largely due to the introduction of non-native species. One of the earliest of which was elm leaf beetle. It was first found in the 1830s. It began feeding on leaves, killed a few trees back in the day, but um, now it kind of exists as like a aesthetic pest on trees. It definitely makes the larvae of this species kind of window pane the leaves. Um, which definitely is causing stress on the trees, but not really killing them. There's also elm yellows, which is a disease that was first detected in like the late 1800s. Um, it's kind of it's a slow moving pest, it doesn't really move around very often, but it does eventually make its way around. It's spread via phloem feeding insects, so insects that are feeding on the sap of trees. Um, and basically, it's come in and it's killed a lot of important elm collections, um, such as those that like arboretums and stuff like that. And then, of course, there's Dutch elm disease. This is by far the worst of the kind of introduced pests or diseases on elms. Um, in 1930, during an outbreak of Dutch elm disease in Europe, the United States imported elm logs. It brought bark beetles, and the fungus that is the causal agent of Dutch elm disease. Um, there have been two outbreaks. The one in the 1930s, the first one kind of spread around. It killed a lot of trees, but things kind of settled after a few years. But in the 1940s, a second fungal pathogen was introduced, very closely related, but much more aggressive. And that spread throughout North America from the 1940s until the and kind of resurged again in the 1970s. And now we don't really see many elms anymore. To give you a kind of to give you an idea of what this kind of looked like in urban areas, this is a before and after. The before is the top picture, not the bottom one. Um, in Detroit, of kind of how quickly, just in the period of 13 years, pretty much all of the trees needed to be replaced um, with these little saplings. Um, and you can imagine the impact that this had in forested regions, on some of our native, or on some of like in our native ecosystems. Uh, and now, um, really, you don't see mature elms anymore. There was an estimated 77 million elm trees in North America, and mature elms are pretty much non-existent at this point. Um, I probably look at it's a bit of a misconception that elms are completely wiped out. Studies have found that they're just as abundant as they were before Dutch elm disease, but they do not reach those large size classes that they used to. I probably look at more elms than most people, and I rarely see them wider with trunks wider than my fist. So basically, these kind of struggling trees that don't reach these large size classes, already dealing with multiple introduced pests and pathogens, now have another pest to deal with, which is the focus of my talk today, Elm Zig-Zag Sawfly, or EZS. Um, to go through a little bit of the biology, so Elm Zig-Zag Sawfly lay their eggs in the tips of the leaf serrations, and early instar larvae feed in the characteristic zigzag feeding pattern. That's what their common name is derived from. However, later instar larvae end up covering up these zigzags in a lot of cases, because they'll kind of, as they grow, they'll drop the zigzag feeding pattern and will instead begin consuming the rest of the leaf. And we'll have a look at what they kind of do to the leaf later. While we're on the topic of larvae, I want to talk a little bit about identification because larvae are probably the most important or the easiest to identify. So a lot of sawfly larvae look very similar to each other. Um, on the left, we have an elm zigzag sawfly, and on the right, we have a unknown sawfly I found on hawthorn. You can see they're both feeding on the kind of on the margin of the leaf. Um, and they both have like black lines on their faces and T-shaped markings on their legs. But that's really where the differences lie. So EZS has two T-shaped markings on the second and third pair of legs. I've seen sawflies that have no markings. I've seen some that have it on all three, like this one. I've seen some that have it on the first two. All of that can vary, but I haven't seen any native larvae that only have it on the second and third pair of legs. Um, Additionally, there's the line that runs through the eye. I haven't seen any native species that have the line that runs all the way through the eye and down on the other side. As you can see in this one, it's only on the bottom or below the eye. Additionally, the zigzag feeding pattern is unique to EZS on elm. It's the only species we know of in North America that creates this kind of zigzag pattern on elm trees. There are other um, zigzagging species. There's some on cherry, but hopefully that won't get confused. They look a little different. They're a little skinnier. Um, Additionally, just because it came to mind, elm zigzag sawfly larvae also produce citral, which smells like lemons. So if you kind of grab them and pick them up or anything, they will produce a lemony odor. There have definitely been times in the lab where it's been a long day and I haven't eaten anything, and I have gotten tempted, but I haven't actually tried them. Uh, Anyway, moving on. So once a larva reaches maturity, it's usually consumed most of a leaf. It will move to the underside of the leaf and spin a loose cocoon, which can also be useful in identification because these cocoons stick pretty well to the leaves and you can find them even late in the season. or you can find them, yeah, pretty much whenever. Uh, After about a few days, they emerge as an adult, and this process from egg to adult takes about 30 days. And there's multiple generations in North America. So this is occurring pretty much continuously throughout the summer. They're just feeding and then uh, pupating and then emerging as an adult. They reproduce asexually. All Elm Zig-Zag Sawflies are female, so there's no downtime for mating or anything like that. They can begin laying eggs as soon as they emerge from their cocoons, and so this is just a constant process throughout the season. Um, Towards the end of the year, kind of the last generation, the mature larvae, instead of moving to the underside of a leaf, will drop to the ground and spin a double-walled cocoon in the soil or leaf litter. These are exceptionally hard to find. We had to search for many of these to actually find them in the wild, um, but we did find a couple. And then they remain in this state until usually April or May, and then they'll pupate and eventually emerge as an adult in the early spring. As far as distribution, Elm Zigzag Sawfly is native to Japan. It was first described in 1939 and wasn't detected outside of the country until 1995. Between those time periods, it wasn't mentioned at all in the literature until the early 90s. Um, it began severely defoliating some Siberian elm planted on in Japan. And then just a few years later, they found it outside of the country. Um, by 2003, it was found for the first time in Europe, in Poland and Hungary, and has since spread to over 35 different European and Asian countries. Of course, we wouldn't be talking about it if it wasn't in New York. Elm Zigzag Sawfly is um, really like a champion of citizen science, or at least our detections of it are pretty much exclusively thanks to citizen science. I'm sure we would have caught it eventually, but we wouldn't have caught it as early as we did. Um, it was first the first post on iNaturalist of this species was from Montreal in right around Montreal in 2020. And eventually, kind of the same year, that prompted uh, Canadian foresters to look more thoroughly at iNaturalist, and they ended up finding some reports in Virginia as well, which populations were confirmed there in 2021. Um, However, looking back even further, we found that the earliest detections of Elm Zigzag Sawfly in North America are from 2019 in central Maryland. I don't know if you can see my mouse, but that central one there. And so clearly there is a wide distribution early on, or at least early on in comparison of when we detected it. Uh, EZS has now been found in over 17 states and 4 Canadian provinces. In New York, it's been found in roughly 35 counties, including on Long Island. Um, and you may be wondering, well, how is this species seemingly spreading so quickly, or how's it getting around at the very least? So, some scientists in Europe attempted to estimate the natural dispersal of Elm Zigzag Sawfly and found that it travels about 28 to 56 miles per year. Again, this is split between multiple generations, so it's not like one individual flying this far. But I, at least me and several others have doubted this figure a little bit. Um, Obviously, it's a very wide range. Um, And it kind of isn't clear. So another aspect of Elm Zig-Zag Sawfly that has been discussed in the literature but never really officially validated is their strong flight ability, which kind of lines up with this like large dispersal rate. Um, but this hasn't actually been experimentally validated anyway. This summer, we're actually hoping to characterize this a little better by putting them on a flight mill and seeing how far they actually fly. If you're not familiar with a flight mill, basically you're attaching the insect to it and letting it fly in circles for several hours, um, and kind of tracking how fast it's going and how far it's going. Um, Another aspect that we found is human-mediated spread. So primarily on human transportation and in the elm trade. Um, so starting with the elm trade, obviously, if elms are being transported during the growing season, especially like the egg stage, and some of the small larvae might not be noticed in a nursery. Um, uh, but really, we don't think that this is the main way they're being transported in the plant trade. Primarily, we think they're in the soil. So elms are primarily purchased in kind of the late fall, early spring, and that's when they're planted, and that's when EZS is in their soil-borne cocoon. So they could be basically if they're infested if a nursery is infested with elm zigzag sawfly late in the season, they drop into the pots of elms or potentially other nearby plants, and they can be transported around. Um, and that's probably how the leap from uh, like kind of East Asia to Western Europe occurred, as well as the jump from uh, Europe and Asia to North America, though again, we don't know exactly how it was introduced. Another way that we know they're being transported is on vehicles. So this is from 2024. It's a, a work vehicle that was parked underneath a infested elm tree in Wisconsin. And as you can see, basically there are pupal cases or cocoons kind of all under the mirror and in the wheel well and under the logos and stuff like that. Um, I don't know. I mean, I might have, like, speaking from personal experience, like I may have noticed if this was my vehicle, I may have noticed the ones under the side mirror, but I'm definitely not checking my wheel wells typically um, before I drive somewhere. So this is definitely a concern as far as spreading this species around further. Um, as far as its kind of limits that we might see, this is the native range of elms in North America. So obviously American elm has the largest range. Um, we have three species native to New York, including American elm, rock elm, and slippery elm. Uh, Elms are only native to the eastern half of North America. Oops. But they're planted in cities kind of across the western states and western provinces as well. Uh, so EZS could potentially reach those locations. Um, As far as the host species of EZS, it was long thought that Elm zigzag sawfly was restricted to Ulmus, or the genus that most of what we consider elms are in. However, a recent study out of Ohio found that particularly early in the year, they will feed on Zelkova as well. Um, uh, I'll talk about why in a second and maybe why that won't be much of a problem. Obviously, Zelkovas are a major ornamental. Um, they've kind of taken the place of a lot of elms in cities. So, uh, yeah, as far as native hosts, as I mentioned, American slippery and rock elm in North America or in New York, they've been found on all three of those, but they've also been found on winged elm, which has a more southern distribution, as you can see here. As far as the other species, they may be susceptible to EZS. They just haven't been found in that range yet. Uh, Before I move on, so Siberian elm, basically preference hasn't been tested yet, but Siberian elm is the supposed preferred host. This is largely due to observations in the field with multiple coexisting species. They were primarily found on Siberian elm. Additionally, luckily for our native species, but not luckily for our ornamental species that we plant in cities and towns, exotics seem to be preferred over natives. Um, but again, this hasn't really been tested very much. As far as the damage we're seeing from this species, um, in Europe, outbreaks lasted 1 to 4 years, but they haven't really seen secondary outbreaks yet. So it's possible that this species is just naturalizing and will kind of, settle down. Defoliation reported ranges from insignificant to complete. You can see on the left, this picture is of um, a Siberian elm uh, I think near Albany that was basically completely defoliated. Um, the picture in the middle kind of shows what that looks like a little closer, and the furthest right picture shows kind of what their damage looks like up close. So they're stripping the leaf back to pretty much just the midrib and some of the wider veins, um, which is definitely limiting a lot. In some cases, heavy defoliation will cause trees to put out new leaves in the middle of the summer. Um, because this species has multiple generations, they basically will just fly onto those new leaves and lay eggs and basically strip them back all the way as well. This hasn't been linked to any tree mortality across its range, either in Europe or North America, but branch dieback has been seen in several places. North Carolina, I've seen a little in New York as well. Um, Otherwise, the impacts, like kind of the overall impacts on tree health, are unknown. They have not been studied in anywhere in EZS's invaded range. Um, and kind of how this species interacts with trees that are stressed due to um, other introduced pests or pathogens is also unknown. Kind of in an effort to begin to understand this is our research on the species. So we've been looking at oviposition preference, which is essentially what um, which elm species do EZS prefer to lay their eggs on. This or last summer we looked at Siberian, Chinese, American slippery and rock elms, and I won't bog down on the details, but uh, we also did larval performance between most of those species, with the exception of Chinese elm, just because we ran out of larvae in the middle of the season. But we looked at survival, consumption rate, and growth rate to kind of uh, look at this. And so, as far as the results of this last summer, the exotic elms definitely seem to be preferred over slippery and rock, but it was a little unclear with American. In one case, they kind of matched preference with American. In the other case, the other was preferred. So we are looking at this again this summer with a little bit of an improved setup. I'm not sure if you noticed that we used pretzel containers last year. We decided to upgrade a little bit to dog food containers. As far as uh, larval performance, performed best on Siberian elm in all three of the metrics that we were testing, which kind of indicates that this likely is their preferred host species. They were also one of the most preferred species in the preference studies. So American elm was right behind Siberian, and then our less abundant slippery and rock elms were definitely the lowest. And again, they were definitely not preferred in the preference studies, which is maybe an indication that it's really just going to be American elm that is maybe impacted heavily by this species. Um, while slippery and rock elm, which again are less abundant, may kind of get away here. Uh, On to phenology. So I discussed that EZS has multiple generations a year. We see the first adults, the overwintering adults, emerge in mid-May or mid-April to mid-May. As you can see on the right, it kind of varies a little bit. We see kind of in southern Quebec and northern New York, which are like along the Canadian border. We see it more in May, while in the Finger Lakes region, we see it in late April. And in central Ohio, they saw it even earlier. We see 4 to 5 generations each year in New York. It varies slightly on how warm the year is. Larvae are generally found continuously from uh, late Sep until late September or early October. Um, and again, they're kind of out there the whole time. At a certain point, the generations kind of overlap, so you may see really small larvae next to really big larvae. So it can get a little confusing to kind of keep track of these generations, but anyway. So as far as this year, I just realized this morning that I should add this in. EZS are already out. I found the first larvae last week at our site near Syracuse, which is where we're based out of. Um, Overwintering adults were captured a lot earlier than we've seen them the past few years, which was a little surprising given the winter we had. But they were first captured on April 22nd, both in Syracuse and in the Finger Lakes region. We tried to get traps in northern New York again, and we had them out there, but we had trouble due to kind of temperatures fluctuating wildly, and we're not exactly sure when they flew up there, but we assume they're out by now as well. This is just an example of kind of how we've tracked the phenology using adults and larvae. This figure is a little complicated and I've struggled with showing it off in the past, but hopefully it makes a little sense. Basically, again, I don't know if you can see my mouse, but in blue, we have this first generation we see in like early May is our overwintering generation, and right after that, we see a peak in the number of larvae. And then we have of the first generation, and then we have the first generation adults, followed by the second generation larvae, and so on, until the end, where we have the fourth generation adults give rise to the fifth generation larvae, which become the overwintering adults the following year. So you can see that as far as the number of larvae, we are getting 5 generations of larvae, but we're only seeing 4 adult flights. I'll talk a little bit more on how we collect that in a few slides. Something else we've seen in North America and potentially a reason why we're seeing kind of more damage on our exotic species than our American species is this phenological mismatch. Essentially, uh, EZS adults of the overwintering generation are flying like right when the buds break on elm. So you can see these two pictures of American elm. This is what the leaves look like when EZS start flying. And so if they're laying their eggs in the tips of the leaf serrations, it's very likely that these leaves are not big enough to accommodate that. On the other hand, at the same time, we look at the exotic elm cultivars and the leaves are pretty much almost completely flushed. And so it's very likely that the reason we're seeing lower populations in our more natural environments is because like 90% of the adults aren't actually getting to lay eggs. A concern is that over time we might see a rapid shift of EZS, basically emerging later, since the ones that emerge later are the only ones giving rise to offspring. Uh, so it's something to think about for the future. I mentioned that EZS potentially only uses Zelkova in the first generation, or early in the year, and that's for the same reason. Zelkovas leaf out at a similar rate to exotic elm cultivars. Um, so the study found that uh, in their plot of American elm that had some Zelkova nearby, they basically found no EZS on Zelkova after the first generation. That's something we'll be incorporating into our studies in 2026 as far as preference and performance. We're going to be looking at Zelkova because it is a bit more economically important. Um, so I guess we'll find out soon what that looks like. Uh, Kind of all of this has we've kind of just been like guessing for the most part that EZS are performing or developing earlier on these exotic cultivars. This was actually the first year. These are just from a few days ago. Um, but we can see kind of these are two larvae at these pictures were taken within a couple days of each other. Um, and we see that on American elm, the larvae are very, very small. You can I would use the width of the veins, the width between the veins to kind of give a guide of how much bigger this larva on the right is. That's pretty much a mature larva, about ready to spin its cocoon. So while this one on the left kind of just hatched. So we're potentially might even see like an extra generation on our introduced species. So that may be why we see a lot more damage on them again. As far as monitoring EZS, there's kind of been two main ways to do it. Yellow sticky traps and soil emergence traps, which can be paired with yellow sticky traps as well. Soil emergence traps, we have not had success with them, possibly because we haven't seen as large populations as some people or as has been seen in some areas. In North Carolina, where it's a lot warmer and the EZS fly a lot earlier, and uh, they've found great success with soil emergence traps, but it only captures that first adult flight, the ones that are actually in the soil. So they're not ideal for if you want to monitor populations throughout the summer. We've found that yellow sticky traps, I mean, they're very simple, they're very cheap, and they're really the most effective and seem to capture adults even at low population densities. Um, so we've kind of triumphed them as the great EZS capturer. We looked at a couple other different like forest insect related traps, and we didn't capture any. So I think yellow sticky traps are the way to go moving forward. There's no lure available for EZS. They're not super common for sawflies, but there are a couple species that they use them for, mostly the some of those conifer sawflies. Um, Here's kind of a close-up of what EZS looks like on these traps. This is one that captured quite a lot. I think there were about 30 on here. Um, just kind of to show you what they look like. And then management. So there's really not similar to kind of the impacts. Management hasn't really been looked at too much uh, anywhere across its range, possibly because it has been becoming naturalized. But in Europe, they used a lot of different stuff in the initial outbreaks. They use entomopathogenic fungi, in addition to kind of a wide suite of chemical options, including some real nasty ones. I mean, you can see the list there on the side. Uh, in North America, we are the problem with them, they were using them primarily as foliar sprays. And the problem is basically they weren't very long lasting, and subsequent populations of EZS would basically just move back onto the trees that they sprayed, like later in the summer from non-treated areas, and basically would just decimate the leaves. So they weren't really ideal and not really cost effective. Uh, at NC State, they are currently looking at soil injections of diatephrin and imidacloprid or imidacloprid, and yeah, so that's another option, and I look forward to seeing what they find. And this would be more for, again, like street trees and stuff where we're seeing a big populations. Uh, Instead, what we've really found is that supporting a suite of natural enemies is kind of more important. There's been 8 parasitoids associated with EZS across its range. The only one from its native range is this Blondelia nigripes, which is a fly. Um, However, I mean, it's a generalist. All of them are. They're extremely generalist. Compsylora, you may be familiar with this one. It's another fly. It basically will parasitize anything that looks remotely caterpillar-like. It's been found widely in North America, though its populations have seemingly declined a lot. It was introduced, I think, for maybe winter moth biocontrol at one point, but it, again, super generalist and really probably isn't adding any or exerting any control over Elm Zig-Zag Sawfly. Generalist predators, some of our native species, actually seem to be doing quite a lot. Um, there's been numerous birds, especially mainly reported in Canada. I haven't personally seen any birds feeding on these larvae, but um, they have been reported really everywhere as feeding on them, and birds are often associated with uh, a sawfly larvae as well as caterpillars. Some of these other predators, I've seen a lot of yellow jackets and paper wasps. I have a video, basically they just come and grab them and then fly away back to the nest, taking them with them alive, which sounds pretty brutal. Stink bugs and plant bugs have all been reported, but really our main predator that we're seeing is this assassin bug. So this pale green assassin bug, you can see standing suspiciously close to that Elm Zig-Zag Sawfly feeding gallery, um, have been reported from uh, basically all the way up from to Canada, all the way down to North Carolina. So basically from the northern and southern edges of EZS's range and everywhere in between. Um, and we happen to see, thinking back to that, I'll just go back a few slides to this, that you see that steep drop off of the number of larvae um, after the third generation. Um, that's kind of right when the pale green assassin bug eggs hatch, and we started seeing nymphs all over the place, and we started seeing the EZS population plummet. We're actually doing a a molecular gut content analysis to kind of get an idea of how many of these pale green assassin bugs are actually feeding on EZS, and that's still in the works, but it's looking upwards of 15% is kind of our preliminary results, though we have to look at a few. And we're also looking into how quickly the EZS DNA degrades in these assassin bugs. I don't have it up here, but another important kind of predator in a lot of sawfly systems are small mammals, particularly when they're in their soil uh, stage. Uh, though this hasn't been reported anywhere in either across Europe or in North America. So it is another thing that we or someone should look at as far as what the populations are, what impact they're having on populations. Anyway, with that, that's all I have. If you have any questions, um, again, we have that the new paper out, which kind of goes into probably much better detail than I did here, trying to remember it all. But anyway,
Thank you. We did have one question in the chat about bycatch, if you're able to avoid catching other bugs on those sticky traps.
so yeah, so I would at this moment, so there hasn't been much looked into trapping. It's definitely another area that could potentially use a little attention. Uh, in Europe, they did evaluate using white sticky traps instead of yellow sticky traps, and they barely caught um, any EZS adults. I mean, obviously, yellow is attractive to a lot of our wasps and sawflies and bees, which is kind of unfortunate because they are getting caught up in that. I don't, as of right now, I don't think there is a way to avoid it, though we don't really put our traps out all season anymore now that we kind of have an idea of how many generations are occurring. But, it's like a necessary evil to understand that.
It makes sense. Any questions in the room for Nick?
The more generations of planet than upper Agar.
What was that? Sorry, I'm having some
Uh,
audio issues here too.
oh, that's a microphone issue. Are there more generations that occur on Long Island than up where you are?
So I think Long Island, I think it's like an unknown down there. I will say that they're seeing typically 5 generations in, obviously North Carolina's a lot more south. But just kind of giving you an idea that we're seeing kind of 4 to 5 up here, and they're seeing 5 down there. So it's probably maxing out around 5 generations. But I don't know exactly for Long Island.
Thank you. Any other questions? There's one more in the chat. I don't know if you see it, Nick, but with that phenological mismatch were the photos of the American elm and Siberian elm taken from the same site or similar geographic area.
Yeah, they were like, it wasn't the same site, but they were like, it was like 20 minutes away from each other. They were very close,
Close by.
and
That's
very
really
similar environments as well.
nice. All right. Thank you so much, Nick. I learned a lot.
Thank you.
All right, I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Frank Piccinini. He's a biologist, environmental attorney, and passionate environmentalist who's dedicated to restoring functional habitat to our human-impacted landscapes. Frank received his JD from Hofstra University School of Law, his MS in Biological Sciences from Marshall University, and his BS in Wildlife and Fisheries Conservation from the University of Massachusetts Amherst. As a partner and co-founder at Simple Consulting, Frank provides expert testimony for community and advocacy groups. Frank also collaborates with real estate developers to inform their land use decisions with sustainable design and empirical data. Additionally, Frank conducts research projects to further the understanding of local environmental issues and the efficacy of potential interventions. Please welcome Frank Piccinini.